And it's been a while now. It's been a couple of weeks since I talked to Justin, but I'm connected to him on Facebook, and I don't know that you could be more liberal than he is. And it's nice to get along with people that you disagree with about stuff, but particularly stuff that's polarizing, like the Yankees and the Red Sox.
Politics is one thing, but now we're talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congratulations, by the way. You got another championship.
I don't know whether you bother to follow any of what was going on there because they're not your guys, but Joey Cora is just a hell of a manager, man. He really brought out the best in everybody, and they got a team full of athletes, and they had some good pitching. So, but it's amazing. Like David Price has sucked in the playoffs his whole career, and all of a sudden he's an all-star in the playoffs. Yeah. Like, where'd that come from?
Yeah,
it always happens. It always happens. That's why the World Series or the playoffs are so awesome, because it makes it more like a college game, right? There's so much more emotion, and people come out of the woodwork. Like, who is that? I think, Bob, I think the audience is. I was talking to my daughter Hannah yesterday because I've been spending some time with her because her business is starting to pick up and she's gaining momentum, and so with that comes new business challenges and entrepreneurship challenges, and it's fun. Because it's kind of what I'm trying to do online is coach kids up, right? Or people up in general, which is kind of, I've been doing that my whole life and I enjoy it. And we were talking about entrepreneurship, and I'm like, it's difficult for me to talk about this stuff without being somewhat political, because personal accountability and the lack of government intervention in my life and a lower tax rate, I don't even consider those political. I just think they're logical. They're like math, 2 and 2 is always 4. It's never 3 and it's never 5.
Yeah.
Anyway. And that's another one of the things that I'm trying to figure out how to balance, because a lot of my personal story is really kind of interesting in terms of, but do I share all this personal stuff, or do I hold on to some of the personal stuff? Because the personal stuff, like when you're looking for work, right? What we do is, how many people have you ever represented that weren't at least to some extent scared or anxious or fearful of the unknown or change or whatever was going to happen, right?
Yeah.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah.
It's the thing you have to manage through the entire process.
The anxiety and the fear. And you manage it with information, right? You manage it with preparation and information. And there's a real, like, very specific process that even to this day, 30 years in, if I interview somebody without an interview form of some kind in front of me, I forget stuff,
Absolutely.
And it's the whole the best coaches even have coaches kind of thing,
Yeah.
So I didn't really have any expectation of a format or, specific stuff. I just thought one of the things I'm trying to get across with this is a little bit about who I am, a little bit about who you are, how we've engaged, how long we've known each other. If I remember us correctly, I hired you a long time ago. How long ago was that?
2003.
So 15 years ago?
Yeah.
And you didn't have any recruiting or selling into the recruiting space. You were selling technical stuff. You were selling hardware?
Yeah, my background was I started out selling mainframe peripherals, DASD tape, and printers, high-speed printers.
So you had sales experience, but you didn't have any staffing experience.
Yeah, I had sales experience in hardware, IT hardware, software, and then I came to you because my brother-in-law worked for you as a contractor. Mike Eggleston.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And I was talking to Mike. We had just moved down to Florida, and my brother and I had been in a business where we were selling networking equipment as a reseller. And I called my brother-in-law Mike, because he lived in Florida. I said, "Hey, I'm down here. I'm thinking about transitioning back to become an employee again. And I'm looking for a sales job. Do you know any headhunters?" And he said, "Well, I don't know what they do, but I work for these guys as staffing. I don't know if they do sales or not." And I gave a call, and Dan Eli answered the phone. And I think you were probably looking for a salesperson at that time. And Dan just set a time for me to talk with you guys, and then kind of went through the interview process from there, and ended up you hired me and another guy who was from the Gartner Group at the time, at the same time.
Oh, I remember that. He was a younger guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah. I remember him. I don't remember his name. I can see his face.
Yeah, I can see his face too. I don't remember, but I remember the two of us coming in at the same time, and then from there we were off to the races. But my brother-in-law and Dan Eli were the gatekeepers.
That's right, Mike Eggleston. I remember that now. I'm glad that you remembered that.
Yeah, I think he was a contractor over at Florida Power and Light or something.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Do you remember who represented him? Who his recruiter was?
Oh, gosh, no, I don't. It was a long time ago. I don't remember who that was.
Yeah, I was going through some of the records. This was months back. I was going through some archived files, and it was a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, and they had the contractor maintenance sheets, if you remember those, where we had the contractor name and the name of the client and the bill rate, the pay rate, the start date, and all the relative. And it was fascinating to me. We did business with a ton of big companies,
Yeah.
We had some really, really big clients. And I think to myself sometimes, I shifted markets like 8 times in my career.
Yeah.
And what if I'd stayed in the same geography and the same technology this whole time? Like, we'd be banging it up. That whole thing, it was, anyway. But
my first, you did business with some big clients. My first placement with you at iTech was, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was an SAP FICO functional guy.
Mm-hmm.
Put him into NASA, Marshall Space Flight Center.
CSC.
And we were like a sub. We had to go in as a sub to somebody. Maybe it was CSC.
Was that in like Alabama, or was that in Florida?
No, I was in Huntsville.
Huntsville. That's what. Yeah, I think that was CSC.
Yeah, on the budget formulation team for SAP at the Marshall Space Flight Center.
That guy, that CSC guy, was extremely pragmatic, as I remember, and not very political. He got us in there when we didn't belong in there.
We didn't belong in there at all.
Yeah.
And he was having trouble finding a guy, so he found somebody we could sub through. And
then he just pulled all the strings required. That's just a perfect lesson in everything that has to do with business. I try and teach young people this, because, and everybody for that matter, how many people do we know that just go through life doing what they're doing because somebody else told them that's what they should be doing? Their father, their mother, their guidance counselor. I was on this radio show 2 days ago locally, 660 AM. You remember those guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the American Adversaries, Christopher Hart. Does that ring a bell?
Vaguely, yeah.
I got my picture taken in the studio after the whole thing was over, and they do a weekend thing where they interview local entrepreneurs, and we just talk about SCORE. You know what SCORE is?
No, I don't.
It's an entity, at the national entity of retired executives that coach people that are starting businesses for free.
Okay.
And it's a 501c, and I started volunteering part-time because I brought Hannah in there, and we met with a woman first, and then we went back and met with a guy that helped the Carrabba brothers build Carrabbas.
Okay.
He was a restaurant expert, and the application that Hannah and Caroline are developing is an iPhone app for healthy restaurant dining. And then we went back for legal advice, and we met with a guy, Nate, who was legal counsel for AT&T for 20 years. And we sat with this guy for an hour. That's a $5,000 hour for free. And it was amazing. It was amazing. We walk out of the office, and Hannah looks at me and goes, "That was amazing, Dad. Did you understand anything he said?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll translate it for you. We'll go have some lunch." I just know that in the real world, that's a high ticket hour right there,
Yeah.
So it's a pretty cool organization. If you ever think of starting a side gig, I don't know if there's one in Nashville or not, but they're all over the country, and the Orlando one's awesome.
Oh, right. No, that's good. Good to know. I still always have this burning desire. The thing that inspired me, I think, the most when you and I were working together, among a number of things, but we had a run where we put a director in. I think we put him in over at CuraScript, one of the pharmacy companies down there. And I don't know if I should throw names like that out.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, I can edit and I can leave stuff in. I mean, okay. I'm not worried about that, but I appreciate your sensitivity. Thank you.
But we put a director in somewhere, and we put a couple of higher level guys in, and that experience of that process was so enjoyable. I liked that so much, and it was also with the SAP guys who were. The conversations were at a different level than, you know, at the lower end of the IT spectrum. When you got up around the architect or the director level, people would really in SAP who had some rarefied skill sets, and many of whom travel around the world doing
that. Yep.
But doing those perm placements of higher level people like that was something I enjoyed very much, and I always harbored this idea that I would like to do a permanent search. I don't think I would do it as a retained search because I don't really understand that world, but as a continued search, I would do it for higher level architect, director level people, or people with skill sets that were a little harder to find, and maybe find a couple of pockets of those. But I love that permanent process of taking people from one position to another and then helping to improve their career or help them achieve some goals in some way. I've always harbored the idea of starting a search firm.
You know, it's interesting. It's and again, just to kind of reframe it, Bob, I don't even know if I've been specific with you, but really what I'm trying to do with this entity, 7pillarsglobal.com, is dump all of what we're talking about, all of my experience helping, I guess, thousands of people find jobs over 30 years, and it has to be. And in permanent placement and contract placement and contract to perm and, you know, different industries, different geographies, different economies. I mean, we did it in booming economies. We did it in bust economies. And excuse me. Fascinating thing is my dog is whining to go outside. Go lie down. Go lie down.
Is that Farley?
Yeah, Farley's on his last legs. Poor guy.
Oh, man. How old is he?
13.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, let me let him out. Just I'll edit this out. Just hang on one second. The other piece of that, which I've always enjoyed as well, not only in placing candidates but in training employees, is nurturing someone up and watching their life change. You know, and how many cool conversations have you had with people where it's like, I talk to people about their marriages, about their children, about their illness, about their dreams and their hopes. I mean, when you get in the permanent world, but even in the consulting world at a higher level, and you really build a true relationship with somebody, it's life-changing for everyone.
When you were talking about changing people's lives, the story that always comes to mind is a guy we placed out at Pilgrim's Pride who was a Java developer up in Chicago, and he was underpaid.
Yeah.
And I remember calling him and telling him, hey, they're making you an offer at Pilgrim's Pride. He goes, oh, Bob, man, that's the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to go have a beer. And I said, and by the way, they're paying you 10 grand more than we thought we'd get. And he said, oh, Bob, we're going to make it a Heineken. And he knew he was underpaid, and he was so excited about getting that position, and it was just a blessing in his life.
Yeah.
It's one of the powerful things about what we do that I really enjoy is you do have, who you marry, where you live, what you do for a living. Those are big things,
Yeah.
And to be part of that is gratifying.
No, it totally is. And I think I totally think I told you I had a nice conversation with Tim, who I hadn't spoken to in years. I've watched his family grow on Facebook, which is one of the few nice things about Facebook.
Yeah.
And they're really, they look like a lovely family. And I just remember hiring him, and he had no experience at all. And I don't even think he was married at the time. And I think he was dating Stacy, but I don't think they were married. And man, that guy, for 3 years, I think, he came into my office every day with a notepad of notes, and every single thing that I told him, he absorbed. And then he turned around and he executed on it. And It was a really nice conversation. He's very grateful, as am I. And to watch people like that go from a recent graduate selling insurance, making nothing, to, I don't know if he's a millionaire, but he's probably close. I mean, he's probably net worth wise, you know, just with the house and stuff, and she works and does well. And it's not even about how much money he's worth or how much money he makes. It's just to watch this progressive success.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and says, I could not have done this without you. And I'm like, well, that's very kind, you know.
Yeah.
And
He sold his company, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He did. And we talked a little bit about that. And I don't think it was an ideal situation. I think that, well, I won't get into that, but I think it worked out great for him.
Yeah.
But I think if he had his druthers, much like me, I would have hung on. You know, I sold because, oh my gosh, it was just there was so much noise, so dark. And I think particularly Scott was just like, I can't take this anymore. I'm like, I get it. Let's go. And that's one of my biggest regrets, is having to sell that company. And, but you know, life goes on. As I was telling Hannah, it's like, one of the keys to happiness is putting the past behind you.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily do it that well all the time, but I think I'm pretty good at it given the circumstances. But yeah, no, those are fabulous stories. And I think talking to people like Tim, and I'm going to get Justin on the phone again and hopefully do something like this or get a testimonial from him on video, because when you're selling online, you lose that human touch unless you figure out a way around it, which is, to me, is this, right? These kinds of stories that people can see my face and our friendship and our relationship and our interaction, plus the nuggets of wisdom that hopefully will continue to pop out of our respective mouths here for the next few minutes. I think that's how you replace the human touch when you're selling online. And it's become pretty obvious to me. So that, you know, I'm writing stuff down. So from the cheat sheets to the workbooks, to the full books, to audios, guided meditations, videos. I'm building a video course right now that basically is starting. I haven't figured out the name yet, but it starts with that. Who are you? What do you want to do? Right. And I think most people skip that step, right? Most people are just like, go on an interview. Well, why? So there's a whole series of like purpose, meaning exercises. And then it goes all the way through from preparing for interviews to negotiating for money to getting investors to invest in your company to preparing for all the steps along the way. And then at the end, it's going to be, you know, the outcome that I'm professing to give to people, that I'm giving to people, is you're going to go from anxiety and fear, even if you're content doing what you're doing. But if you really are content doing what you're doing, you're probably not watching this video course, right? So you got an itch of some kind, right? A professional itch of some kind, and we can scratch it one of two ways. You can go to work for somebody else, in whatever that means, or you can start your own thing, or maybe you can do both concurrently, and this thing's a side gig until you start making enough money to jump out of your, you know, permanent position. All the way to the end, it's like at the end of this thing, you're going to be like, you can do whatever you want now, but now you've got all the information you need. You're ready. You're going to kill the interview. You're going to kill the negotiation. You're going to be able to get more money. And what I'm finding is there's a parallel track between going to work for someone else and starting your own company, where like 90% of that journey is the same. Like there's negotiation in the whole thing, right? The preparations in the whole thing, right? And like when I was talking about, I started writing about money in this 4th of 6 modules. I'm like halfway done writing this thing. It's going to be like 60 pages of script, and I'm going to chunk it up into maybe 5 to 7 minute videos, so it's consumable. You can binge it like Netflix, or you can just chunk it up in 5 or 10 minutes, so time doesn't get in your way of, you know, you learning the process. And then I'm going to probably have some like a Facebook Live group where I can interact with people. Do some Q&As. You know, I like the notion of, in a professional sense, here's Mark, and it's like, what's the name of your show? It's called Ask Me Anything. Anything. and I think 57 years in, Bob, I can almost suggest that I probably can answer most of those questions. and I enjoy it, right? So
Yeah.
so I'm the vision of what this is, I guess, an information, a career-based professional and personal development information online site where you can eventually get some information that's very practical. It's not theoretical. Like, don't you hate it when someone says, "Oh, you're in human resources"? I'm like, no, I'm not in human resources. So does framing it like that, does that help you understand what I'm trying to do?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
What do you think?
No, it's it's funny when you're talking about Tim and the notepad. This is probably the first time I've sat down with you to discuss business where I don't have a notepad in front of me. It was one of the things I think you were great for the beginning, but first of all, it's a natural thing for you to do because you are a teacher. And you mentioned being 57. I always think it's interesting that I am 3 years your senior, but still think of you as a mentor. And and I had very few of those in my life. A couple of others, my father being one.
Mine too.
Yeah, but I absolutely think of you in those terms, so that you're taking that ability. And I think Tim would probably say the same thing. I think Kevin would say. I think there's a lot of people who would say the same thing.
Yeah, thank you.
And that you're taking that ability and that skill set, and then expanding it out electronically and through and reaching out to a broader audience with it is an excellent idea, first of all, and kind of a natural thing for you to do. And I think of value to people who are either looking for a job or looking to start a business. And then there's probably some other nuggets of information in there that are useful outside of business as well. But it's a good thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, thank you. And I think, and again, the reason that I call it personal development as well is because I can't avoid those topics. You know, the topics like nutrition and fitness and meditation and yoga and prayer and spirituality, emotional well-being, family. My dad was a mentor. My dad was the dad to the kids in the neighborhood that didn't have a dad. He was the baseball coach. He was the captain of the plane, the TWA. He was the leader and the mentor, and I definitely gravitate towards that. Everything that we did at iTech and everywhere we've worked, the training people was my favorite part. And what is training other than teaching and mentoring? So that's very kind of you to say that, and it's part of what's kind of pulled me in this direction, because it's not that I don't enjoy the transactions, the changing one person's life at a time. What if I could change 10,000 people's life at a time? Even just a little bit, And so, I'm figuring out the logistics of how to package all of this. But what I find is, and Hannah was complimenting me on it yesterday, Dad, you're so prolific in terms of what you can create. I'm like, there's a lot of shit up there. It's not really a question of what's up there. It's a question of how do I get it out and where do I put it, But no, that's and re-engaging with people like yourself, not that we don't talk, probably not frequently enough, but is like, you already shared a couple stories with me that I forgot. I forgot about Mike, that your brother-in-law introduced us. I didn't forget about the CSC thing, because I remember that guy because he was so helpful to us. He got us into a system that everyone was like, you're not a vendor, you can't do this. How many times were we told you can't play with us? And then we were playing.
Yeah, but you can. How many times are you told we have no needs, but there are?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's there's the picture that people show, and then there's the reality.
And it's always different, isn't it? It's always, and I think this is one of the most empowering things that I can teach people, particularly young people, is do not do anything just because someone else says you have to do it. There are instances where, if a police officer tells you to do something, you should probably do it. They're not mutually exclusive, but man, if I had a dime for every time somebody said, you can't do that, and I did it, I'd have a shitload of dimes, as the saying goes, you know? What about if you were to, and this is a self-serving request, but if you were to say, if someone were to engage my mentorship, if someone were in a position of that professional itch, whatever it was, because I do feel comfortable no matter where that itch is going to take you, I can help you get there with less frustration, with less pain, and probably faster than you could get there otherwise. Not just because of my experience, but because of my desire to help. What did you get? What did you get the most of from my, if I may be so presumptuous to say, mentorship?
A couple of things. I think probably the thing everybody would need to bring on their own would be a work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
And given that you had that, the things that I got from you were, I think, getting to the root of what people were really saying and really listening to what people were saying. I remember when you started teaching me, you would be listening in on my phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a weird experience at first. And you would feed me lines. And at some point, it got to be almost like I could anticipate what you were going to say, because I'd heard it before. We've been through this process before.
Yeah.
And then it really kind of became fun. Well, my favorite moments were where I would beat you to the punch after I'd done it a while.
Yeah.
And like, I'd be like, I got there first. Okay. I had it right. And but it was really, I think, your understanding of human nature and in talking to people, getting to the root of what it was that we're saying. I remember you would always qualify things back and forth. Somebody would say blue, and you would be like, well, what do you mean by blue? Do you mean this shade of blue, that shade of blue?
Yeah.
And you would dig deeper into the surface of what was being said, into finding out what was really going on.
Yeah.
I think that was, just from a tactical day-to-day point of view, that was extremely valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's fun. It was kind of like a team sport, wasn't it? It was like a bit of a locker room, the sales training. And I also remember fondly, when I wasn't on the phone with you, and not that you needed me on the phone after a certain period of time, but you'd come in and you'd bring a situation to me and we would strategize about it. Yeah. And I used to enjoy those as well with everybody, but you in particular.
Yeah, those were good. I think you have the thing that you would bring to anybody going through this process is finding a job or starting a business, which the core of it is essentially the same through most of it, is your experience. You've done it for a very long time. And you've done it at a high level where you started a multi-million-dollar business. I worked with you in, that you had, and grew that business from the ground up. So you've been through those conversations and those situations so many times that there probably always are some things that are, oh, that's a little different twist on what I've seen before, but not alien to, it's not like a new set of rules every time for you. So you've seen it before, you've been through it, so you can relax in that process and understand where it's going. And I think that level of experience is highly valuable to someone going through that process.
Yeah, thank you. I've been very recently, like as recent as yesterday, in a discussion with Hannah about the growth of her business. And, I don't, it's not that I don't know anything about nutrition. I'm very experienced in the nutrition space because it fascinates me and I'm interested in it. And I've been practicing it for a long time, but I'm not nearly as proficient with knowledge as she is. I don't think there's anybody in the world that knows more than she does about nutrition. I firmly believe that because she's been a self-tested guinea pig on herself since she was 12. And it was driven by a poor image of her body that was developed, for a variety of different reasons. And I think it's a very common thing for women to be self-conscious of their bodies and, and a lot of men as well. I think it's kind of a human nature kind of thing, but this business is foreign to me, yet everything that we talk about is the same, And just like you're saying, I find myself a lot going, does that make sense? Because that's the reverse of what you just talked about. It's like, I want to know that what I said to you is understood and it makes sense to you, because this is an opportunity for you to say, no, it doesn't make sense. Can you say that again? And I also find myself saying to people all the time, and it's challenging to do this without being condescending, because my intention is not to condescend at all. My intention is for clarity, right?
Yeah.
And so, would you say that again, please? I say that a lot too. I'm not sure what you mean. And I think maybe a lot of people are reticent to say that because, well, that means you're stupid if you say that. I'm like, no, it just means I don't know what you mean. And I'm happy to ask you to say that again, because I don't want to walk away with a different understanding than you want me to have.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the decisions that I make will be errant. They'll be misguided, you know. And that's a lot of what I seem to be helping people with. But part of what, when I started the preparing for the interview thing, I put a video online. You probably haven't seen it, but I invite you to go look for it on my YouTube channel. The 13 tips to prepare for a job interview. And one of the 13 tips was, when you meet someone, you look them in the eye and you give them a firm handshake, because if you give me a wet noodle and you look off to the side, I'm not going to hire you, right? Because why would I put such a person in front of my customers? Why would I put such a person in the same room with my other employees who look me in the eye and shake my hand firmly? I wouldn't. And dude, people aren't being taught that, Bob. They don't know this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So
I just went through, we had somebody come in and interview for a job, and part of the process we go through now is, as a team, we meet them when they get down toward the end of the process, and it's casual. It's at a restaurant, it's at a bar, it's you know, but it's everybody sitting around having a conversation. And I can't tell you how many times that we've been through this where the handshake I get is on the way to the next handshake.
Yeah.
And the eye contact doesn't happen. And you can see their whole body, their whole mind is moving toward the next person they have. Instead of like dealing with me, like, hey, I'm here right now dealing with you. Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
They've already moved on and they're to the next thing, and they've just passed you. And it's right away, you're like, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think it's just something to be conscious of. So I think, and someone used the phrase with me the other day that, don't suffer from the curse of knowledge. And when you're training somebody, what they meant was, if you're an expert at something, you're going to have a tendency to start your training at step number 5. You need to come back to step number 1, because you're assuming that, well, that's just obvious. Everyone would know that.
Yeah.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And if I start at step number 5, everything that I do, it becomes less effective, because those first 4 steps are the foundation of what I'm trying to teach you. And without them, the rest of this stuff is weaker and less effective.
Yeah.
Right? That's it's really, I reflect back on how I became a recruiter and how perfect it was for my background and personality. It's the mediator, it's the lawyer, it's the psychologist, it's the counselor, it's the mentor, it's all of those things that I so enjoy.
Yeah.
I just don't like human resources.
Because that's the process. That's the paperwork.
Oh
right?
my gosh.
Yeah, that's not the vigorish of the deal for you or for me. It's always the human interaction and changing the thing I loved always was changing the status quo, and I think that's even a term that came from you somewhere in our conversations. But you walk out into the day and you talk to somebody and you talk to somebody else, and when you got to the end of the process, the world changed a little bit. Somebody left one job, started another. Somebody got a new boss. Somebody got a new employee.
Yeah.
And that started because you picked up the phone and did something and interacted with other human beings. For me, that's the joy of it. The human resources stuff is the paperwork, the drudgery. You can't do that because you don't have this stamp on your piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, people talk a lot about automation and how fearful they are. I mean, look, when we started, you know, I don't think there were any job boards, were there when we started?
No,
No, like
no.
Monster and Dice weren't around yet.
They were fairly new, and they may have been out there. But I remember you telling stories about doing it with index cards in a phone book because they
Dude,
were.
I remember yellow index cards, which were recycled from like 3 years ago. And one of the first days on the job, we recruited at night like 3 days a week. We worked 9 to 9, 3 days a week, and we got off at 2 on Fridays. And we were expected to make 100 phone calls a day at the beginning, 100. And I called this one number and I asked for the guy, and the woman started crying. And I said, "I'm so sorry. What's wrong?" She said, "He just died." I'm like, what am I doing here? And then I remember meeting a guy in the lobby that just got laid off, and they sent me out because I was a rookie, and this guy was a mechanical engineer. Have you ever shaken the hand of someone with no thumb?
Not that I can recall. No.
You'd remember.
I bet you would. Yeah.
He got it cut off on a saw, but it startled me because obviously you're not prepared for that. And when you grip someone's hand and there's an absence of a thumb, you just all I can remember thinking is, I hope he can't tell how shocked I am right now. Like, I don't even know what to do. And he smelled of alcohol. He'd just gotten laid off. And I was in a small room interviewing him, and I thought, he was a pretty big guy. I thought, I got to be careful what I say here. This guy's going to get angry because he came here angry without a thumb and a couple of cocktails in him. Oh, the stories. That's the other thing cool about this job is the stories, man.
I think every recruiter has that one of talking to somebody where somebody just passed, where you called and that person is. I remember it happening to me and being absolutely dumbstruck and had nothing to say but my condolences.
Yeah, I was mortified. I was mortified. And one of the stories I always tell, and I think it's very, very helpful for everyone to understand, is the notion of silence. Do you remember this?
Yeah.
Well,
you don't have to fill it all with
I learned that the first placement I ever made, he was an electrical engineer. He was a single father with 3 young boys, raising them on his own, and he was unemployed, and he was about to lose his house. And that was my first placement. I got him a job. You could talk about life-changing.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the phone, and the owner of the company, Johnny Mack, who was a Vietnam vet and nuts. He was nuts, but he was fundamentally really sound. And he's feeding me lines just like we did. That's the way you get trained. And the deal's closed, offers accepted. I got my first fee. I just changed this guy's life and saved his kids. And Johnny Mack goes to me, "I have a problem." And I looked at him and I'm like, "I'm not saying that." He goes, "I have a problem." And I'm like, oh, this whole thing's going to blow up. And I go, "I have a problem." And the guy goes, "Oh, what?" And Johnny Mack doesn't give me the next line. He just watches me for a second on purpose. And I'm like, it felt like 30 minutes was going by, and it was like 5 seconds. But he went like that. And then he goes, "I just lost my best candidate. Who else do you know that I should talk to?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, the magic, right? The magic of, that's the best time to ask for referrals.
Yeah.
That guy, there's no better time. He will never feel more obligated than right now in this moment to give you referrals.
He's also never going to feel closer to you than that moment.
I mean, there was so much to learn in those 5 seconds. There was so much there. I just thought to myself, I'll never forget it because of how uncomfortable I was, and then how immediately it was magical.
Yeah.
And he gave me a bunch of people. He gave me a bunch of people, and that also makes me think about whether if I had stayed in the Boston market for the whole time I was doing this, the programmers you placed 30 years ago are the chief executive officers now.
Sure.
So, well, yeah, I mean, I guess we never even framed our relationship, and I can feed it in there. But yeah, I mean, we hired, what'd you say it was, 2003?
Yeah, it was it was either early 2003 for some reason. I want to say like March 2003. I had come down to Florida after we left, maybe about 5 months after 9/11, and
Oh, okay.
we went down to Florida, and we had my wife's grandmother was living with us, and Florida was the easiest place to do that.
I remember that. I remember that. Bob, excuse me for 1 second. I'm going to let the dog back in. He's scratching at my door. Farley's not appreciative of this, the need for silence on the videos. But
and then, so we had come down about 5 months after 9/11, and then I spent a year doing our business down in Florida, but a lot of the we were resellers for like 3Com, Bay Network, Cisco.
I remember that.
And a lot of the folks when I got to Florida already have relationships. So at some point it was like, this really, I'm not finding my niche down here. So then I went out and started looking and went to work with you in 2003, worked with you all the way through the sale of your company, through a year with the folks who bought it. We stayed there, and then I went with you for the beginning of your next company, Lucid, for a while. And then
That's right.
I moved up to Nashville, and when I got up here, just kind of got a job up here after a while.
But when you came to work for me, did I hire you as a sales guy?
Yes.
And then you evolved into a recruiting position, or we kind of did a bit of both?
Well, when you started Lucid, it made sense. You're the big dog salesman, so it was like you didn't need another sales guy. You needed people to help find people. So the training I got from you was much more on the sales side, and then we jumped in, at least in a. It's not totally accurate. The formal training I got was on the sales side. The day-to-day training as a recruiter kind of came just working with you at the beginning of Lucid there.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how similar those roles are?
Yes.
A lot of people like to distinguish, and I remember, and maybe it's still the case, is that the salespeople are looked at in a higher regard than the recruiters, and that the sales position was a promotion from recruiter. And I just always hated that, because I think it's a different position to some extent. And some people prefer to sit behind a desk and talk on the phone, and some people prefer to get in front of other people face to face. And some people can do both. It's not a right or wrong thing, but to look down at the recruiters was the biggest mistake I think people made in my entire career. Like you couldn't possibly destroy a culture more than by doing that.
The position, I just switched jobs recently. I was with one employer up here for about 5 years, and then they got bought out by a much larger company.
I remember you telling me that.
Yeah, and it's I prefer the kind of environment like you had at iTech, which was a very small, capable band of guerrilla fighters. It was. There's something in that dynamic that I really enjoy. Once it becomes big and corporate, and my patience tends to wear. But the company I was with for 5 years, they viewed that relationship as the salesperson somehow being superior to the recruiter, and almost like where you were reporting to the sales guy.
Yeah.
It was. I always thought that idea. You used to use a differentiator with customers. Are you a vendor or are you a partner?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great distinction between that. And I think the places where the recruiters are a partner with the salesperson, that's a healthy dynamic. The places where the salesperson is seen as a promotion or a step above, and you're somehow they get to lord that over you, is a very strange. And I had that for 5 years. I did not like it at all, and I thought it was counterproductive and poisonous to a degree.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about corporate culture. Do you know who Simon Sinek is? Sinek?
I do not know.
Yeah, he's a motivational speaker, among other things, and he's very interesting to listen to. And he talks a lot about culture and leadership and things like that. Very astute fellow. I don't know much about his background. I bumped into him online, and apparently he's a very famous guy and done a bunch of TED Talks, and some of the best TED Talks ever. And some of those are pretty good. But he talked about leadership, and he talked about culture in the context of, in the context of love and brotherhood. And he's like, in the military, they refer to themselves as brothers and sisters. That's powerful leadership, Yeah. And you and I have experience with team sports. I think it's a very similar thing. It doesn't require the same level of courage and bravery, but it's the same kind of camaraderie. And I always thought in the sales culture, it's how I learned. It's the environment in which I learned. It was a locker room. It was brothers and sisters, And I just think that, but I also have seen tons of sales organizations that are just like transactional machines, and the people come in and 3 to 5 years later, they come out the other end, and the commission structures are much lower and the margins are much lower and the profit margins it's a different business. And I think it's there. I don't know that one of those businesses is right or wrong, but I know that one's a lot more fun than the other, just a lot more fun, and it's interesting. I think everyone that we've worked with would probably have a similar feeling about different cultures. And I would suspect that if I walked into Tim's company before he sold it, there was a brotherhood going on there. And any of the other people that the only guy out there, I don't know. Did you ever know Ted?
I did not. He had left before I got there. I think I came either within a year of his departure.
Yeah, that was I don't remember. There were people that I fired. There were people that I didn't see eye to eye with and parted ways with over periods of time. But he's the only guy that I think would be uncomfortable in my presence, and rightfully so. And it was just a complete lack of integrity. And so I won't use his last name in case, God forbid, this finds its way into his world. Even as negative as I feel about him, that's not fair to do that to anybody. So that's a common enough name that no one will able to attribute the actual person to what I just said. But so many stories, man. And that's one of the fun things about doing this is I can't tell them all. We don't have enough time, Well, do you have any, you have, given the circumstances, given the fact that I wanted this to be entertaining, I wanted to be engaging, I think it is, but I also wanted the world, whoever that might mean, that was contemplating working with me in any capacity, or just reading some of my stuff or watching my online course or whatever. Why should people consider doing that, Bob, in your humble opinion?
Oh, I think that you offer an insight into the human condition as it exists within the business world, whether it's finding a job or it's looking to start a business, where you've had a world of experience that you articulate very well, and you're able to kind of break the whole process down and make it understandable and give some insight into the process and how to make it work better for you, and how to make it work better for everyone involved. I think that's one of the things I always liked about working with you. We were always out for a win. We were always out for success, but it also meant success for the candidate, success for the client. It was, we were looking to make the whole situation better than the way we had found it. But I think somebody specifically who's looking for a job or who's looking to start a business would do very well to avail themselves of the knowledge that you've accumulated and your ability to articulate it in a way that's useful.
No, that's very, very gracious, and that's going to be a soundbite, because that's really it's two things. It's the hardest thing to get across. Is I remember when we sold the company to S3, and I remember thinking after the fact, finding out what I found out after the fact, that there was no cultural balance there. There was the due diligence we did was on the numbers. The urgency with which we sold the company had to do with my personal circumstances, not a wise business decision. But the diligence that went into making that decision, I thought was very thorough. And what I discovered after the fact, whether this is handy for you or not, it's just interesting, is we didn't do any cultural diligence. We didn't dig under the covers of who are these people and what's the culture like. And I remember, and I won't use her name either, one day hearing from her, I want you to stop selling yourself. And I thought to myself, I don't even know what that means. That's all I've ever sold, you know? And like, and I'm like, oh, this isn't going to work. and then we discovered that they really bought us because they wanted an office in Boston. They just dismantled Florida, and it was just their intention, and they weren't forthright about their intentions, but shame on us. It's, you know, it's another example of how would someone know to do that without going through it and making the mistake, you know? So, I mean, I can probably help people that are contemplating selling a company. I know I can, because it's a very complicated process, and it's a very emotional process. And I've made some big mistakes. I don't regret them, but I mean, that's a perfect example of that, which is, you know, a lot of my value has to do with the amount of mistakes that I've made. And
it was always you were saying that, I'm thinking of my father going, he would say things like, you know, I made these mistakes, you don't need to make them again. You know? And that's probably the other thing that would be valuable to people is through your experiences, you can point out a lot of the pitfalls. I do it with my old children.
Well, I was just going to say, anybody who has teenage kids, and mine are all 20s. Caroline just turned 30. Life goes by fast. Yeah. Marky's 21, and I'm a grandfather. I mean, like it's all of those experiences add value to my knowledge, right? But the one thing I'm sure you've discovered is, just because you've made a mistake and you share that mistake with your son or your daughter doesn't mean they don't have to go through it themselves before they actually figure it out.
Yeah, everybody's got to go through their own journey, right? Yeah, but it's hard to sit there sometimes and watch it.
It's brutal.
Going, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Yeah, all right, you did it. Here we go.
Well, it really is. It's, you know, training someone to go on an interview or training someone to start a business is really like teaching your kids, I think. And and I don't know if I can't remember if I shared this with you at the beginning of this, and we can wrap things up. But part of the reason I am doing this is because when I went to help my kids find jobs out of school, I discovered or rediscovered or felt really silly that it wasn't obvious to me. They didn't know any of this stuff. Nobody teaches this stuff in school. Like, I remember showing my kids how to write a check, right? And how to open up a bank account. I mean, you're paying $70,000 a year to go to college, and what are you learning if you're not learning that? Do you understand what compound interest is, and why if you put $2 in the bank every day for the rest of your life, you'll be a millionaire by the time you're 30? Like, nobody told me that. You know, so all of these little nuggets, they're all part of the deal. But I had a thought, I had a second point that popped out of my head that had to do with, what was it? The culture. No, you had mentioned and very wisely that we always focus on everybody winning was the definition of a win. So if the recruiter and the sales rep and the customer and the candidate won, we won. Right? If any of those people didn't win, it wasn't a win, right? It was a transaction, you know? And I've always felt that way. And I feel that way about coaching people. It's just like, everyone's got a win or it's not a win, you know? So did you have anything else popping into your head that you wanted to add, or?
You know, you were talking about when you sold your company. And I remember when we walked in one day and guy from S3 was sitting there. He was a guy we'd never seen before. He's sitting at the table, and we can fast forward to when the latest company I worked for got sold. I walk in one day, and there's a very well-dressed woman that looks like a C-level person in the conference room.
Yeah.
And all the executives are slightly deferential to her. And there's all of a sudden an all-hands meeting. And I turned to the guy next to me and said, "We just got sold." And he looked at me and goes, "No, what are you, crazy? We didn't sell the company. What are you talking about?" So we walk in, we sit down, and the CEO stands up and goes, "Well, this is a hard day for me, but I brought everybody in to tell you that we just sold the company to XYZ company."
To the well-dressed lady in the room, yeah.
To the well-dressed lady in the room, and I said, you know how I do that? Because I've been there before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of this stuff you just have to be there before. But it's funny. I thought about that, and that was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. I mean, getting divorced is number one on the list. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. But selling that company, because that was like a child of mine, and I loved everybody that was there. And the decision as to how to go about informing people and when to inform people was probably one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made.
Yeah, you have a lot of restrictions on you as to what you can say, what you can't say.
But do you? I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that maybe there was a better way to do it. Maybe I could have shared that information earlier and it would have worked out better for people, or maybe I did the right thing. But I don't know that I'll ever know, Bob. It was just like I was very conflicted in terms of my loyalties, and it was very uncomfortable. It was very uncomfortable.
Well, that's a hard thing, but just to let you know that the second guy I worked for who did that, he did it and it looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
I think that kind of thing has a process of its own and an inertia of its own that's probably kind of directs how that works.
Well, and there's, and I don't even remember whether this is the case, but I assume that it was, that part of the agreement is that the people that are cutting you the big check have some say in that. Like, I kind of have to do what they want me to do because they're the ones that are paying me.
Yeah.
And that was wow, so many lessons learned on that one. But anyway, yeah, no, I appreciate. I'm glad to hear that the family is well, and I appreciate you taking the time, and I think we got some good nuggets in here, and I'll keep you posted as things develop. This radio show, that was so much fun. And they're going to send me a recording of it, and I'll shoot you a link to it they're going to send me a commercial free. So I think we recorded for about an hour, and I think the commercial free version is probably closer to a half an hour of talk. And this guy was cool. He invited me to dinner, and so I'm going to try and get on his regular radio show during the week. Well, listen, I'll let you run. Did you have anything else to add, or are we good to go?
No, I think we're good to go. This was fun. It's good to see your face again. I hear your voice, but it's good to sit and talk with you again.
You too. We should probably do this outside the bounds of my business needs.
Yeah, we could. And if you're ever up here, I know you got some family up here. If you're ever up here, let me know.
No, I will. We'll do some coffee or whatever. I've been telling Rich for a while I got to get up there because my nieces and nephews are getting, they're 15, 16 years old now. I mean, I haven't seen them in way too long, and it's a car ride for me. I don't need to even get on a plane. So, but I will not visit Nashville without saying hello.
Sounds good, man. I will talk to you down the road. I appreciate it, man.
Enjoy your weekend, Bob.
Take care. Wait, there's the Yankee hat right back there. I put my chair in the wrong spot. I was going to have it over my shoulder the whole time.
I'm going to pretend that's a Notre Dame hat that I can't quite make it out.
I'll see you later.
All right, take it easy, Bobby.